Today we will take a closer look at a central and defining theme in the Gospels: mercy. The stories about Yeshua are filled with encounters with people in need, the sick, the marginalized, and those pushed to the edges of society. These encounters are often described as miracles. But in this reflection we will ask whether these stories are necessarily meant to be understood literally, or whether they primarily convey a deeper ethical and human truth. What does mercy mean in Yeshua's life and practice? How is it rooted in the Torah? And why does mercy ultimately become the decisive measure of human life, as expressed so clearly in the passage about judgment in the Gospel of Matthew? When we read the Gospels, it is striking how often the narratives revolve around suffering, illness, and human vulnerability. Again and again, we encounter stories in which Yeshua heals, helps, and lifts up people who have fallen outside the boundaries of society. The blind receive sight, the lame rise and walk, those considered unclean are restored, and people long defined as unworthy are seen and treated as whole human beings. For many modern readers, an immediate question arises. Must these stories be understood literally? Do they require belief in biological miracles that suspend the laws of nature? Or is there another way of reading them, one that makes sense even for those who do not approach the texts through a natural scientific lens? Perhaps this is precisely where the Gospels invite us to read more deeply. They do not present themselves as medical case reports or modern historical documentation. They are theological narratives. They seek to reveal something about reality, about God, and about the human condition, through images, actions, and encounters charged with meaning. In the ancient world, illness was rarely seen as merely a physical condition. It was closely bound to shame, social exclusion, and religious interpretations. To be sick often meant to be considered unclean, cut off from community life, and excluded from full participation in society. When the Gospels tell us that Yeshua heals, they are therefore also telling us about people who regain their lives in a social and existential sense. It is important to notice whom Yeshua helps, not the powerful, not the successful, not those who already possess security and status. He turns toward the poor, the marginalized, and those whom no one else stops for. People who carry both visible and invisible wounds. Many of them have lost more than their health. They have lost dignity, hope, and belonging. When Yeshua stops for them, it is not merely an act of kindness. It is a radical expression of mercy. He sees the human being behind the condition. He looks beyond the categories imposed by society, and he acts as if their lives carry infinite value. This gives us an important interpretive key. Perhaps the healings are not primarily about suspending natural laws, but about transforming the way human beings are seen. When the blind receive sight, it can be understood as an image of a person regaining direction, clarity, and meaning. When the lame rise, it may point to someone who has been paralyzed by shame, fear, or exclusion, and is now able to act and live again. When those deemed unclean are restored, it is not only the body that changes, but the person's entire place in the world. These stories therefore speak powerfully to our own time. Many people today do not suffer from leprosy or paralysis, but from other forms of pain. Loneliness, anxiety, psychological distress, a deep sense of failure or worthlessness, the feeling of standing outside community even in wealthy and modern societies. Faced with this, the Gospels do not first ask, "What do you believe about miracles?" They ask something else. How do you meet people in need? What do you do when you encounter suffering? Do you pass by or do you stop? Yeshua rarely teaches mercy in abstract or theoretical terms. He does not deliver systematic lectures on empathy or social ethics. Instead, he embodies mercy in action. He stops when others hurry past. He listens when others dismiss. He touches those whom no one else will touch. And in that touch, something decisive happens. The person is affirmed as fully human. Yeshua's mercy does not arise in a vacuum. It is deeply rooted in the Torah and in Israel's ethical tradition. In the books of Moses, God is repeatedly described as merciful and compassionate, slow to anger and rich in loving kindness. This understanding of God takes concrete form in commandments and social structures designed to protect the vulnerable, the poor, the widow, the orphan, and the stranger. The Torah is not merely a legal code, but a guide for shaping a society in which human dignity is preserved. When Yeshua shows mercy, he does nothing foreign or lawless. He brings the Torah's deepest intention into the present. He reads the Torah from below, from the perspective of those who suffer, and makes mercy the key to interpretation. When he says that mercy outweighs sacrifice, or when he heals on the Sabbath, it is not a rejection of the Torah, but a way of interpreting it. A reminder that the Torah was given for life, not to suffocate it. In Yeshua's practice, the ethics of the Torah become embodied. Mercy is no longer an abstract ideal, but something that happens when one human being truly sees another and acts. This becomes especially clear in stories where Yeshua challenges established religious interpretations. He heals on the Sabbath, not to provoke for its own sake, but to expose a fundamental ethical question. What matters most? Rigid interpretations of the Torah or the human being. When the Torah is used to justify indifference, it loses its purpose. Mercy then becomes not an addition to the Torah, but its deepest meaning. In this way, the miracle stories also function as a critique of hard systems. They expose societies that explain away suffering and shift responsibility onto those who suffer. They reveal how religious structures can become instruments of exclusion rather than sources of life. And they pose an uncomfortable question in every age. Who are the ones pushed aside in our society today? This question is made especially vivid in the parable of the compassionate Samaritan. Here it is not correct theology or formal religious position that determines who acts rightly. It is the one who shows mercy in practice, the one who allows themselves to be affected by suffering and takes responsibility even when it comes at a cost. This points to a consistent pattern in Yeshua's life and message. Mercy is not primarily a feeling, it is a way of being in the world, a willingness to be interrupted, a decision to truly see the other person, even when it is uncomfortable or demanding. When we read the healing stories in this way, they become profoundly relevant. They do not only tell us about what once happened in Galilee, they tell us about what can happen wherever mercy is given space. Where people are not reduced to diagnoses, failures, or categories, but are met as whole persons. In our own time, it is easy to think of healing as something that belongs exclusively to healthcare systems, technical, professional, and clearly defined. But the Gospels broaden the perspective. They remind us that healing also concerns relationship, belonging, and meaning, about being seen, about being believed, about having a place. Perhaps this is why these stories continue to speak to us. Not because they force us to take a position on the supernatural, but because they challenge us ethically and humanly. They ask what kind of society we want to be. A society that pushes the vulnerable aside, or one in which mercy is a foundational value. Toward the end of the Gospels, we see that this mercy does not protect Yeshua from suffering. On the contrary, his life ends in rejection, violence, and death. Yet even here, the same pattern persists. In suffering, he remains faithful to mercy. He responds not with revenge but with forgiveness, not with power but with vulnerability. In this way, the entire narrative becomes a coherent, ethical vision. A picture of a world in which human worth is not measured by usefulness, purity, or performance, but by the simple fact of being human. A world in which healing does not always mean that pain disappears, but that a person is no longer alone in it. As we listen to these texts today, we are therefore confronted with a simple but demanding question. Not, do I believe in miracles, but, how do I live mercy? Where do I stop? Whom do I see? And whom do I pass by? Perhaps this is where the deepest message of the Gospels lies, not in the spectacular but in the near, not in the supernatural but in the human. Where mercy is allowed to act, people can rise, gain new sight, find new strength, and become whole, even in a world where no laws of nature are broken. This ethical thread is gathered with particular force in one of Yeshua's most serious and challenging texts, the passage about judgment in the Gospel of Matthew. Here, humanity is pictured as being separated like sheep and goats. Yet once again, the judgment does not concern confessions of faith or correct doctrine. It concerns mercy. The questions are concrete and ordinary. Did you feed the hungry? Give drink to the thirsty? Welcome the stranger? Clothe the naked? Visit the sick and the imprisoned? What matters are not extraordinary achievements, but human acts of care. The most radical element in the text is the identification that takes place. What was done to the least was done to him. Mercy thus becomes an encounter with the holy. To turn toward the vulnerable is to turn toward God. To turn away is to do the same. Read ethically. This judgment is not primarily something that happens in the distant future. It happens now. Our lives reveal what we have seen and what we have chosen to ignore, not as punishment, but as truth. Matthew 25 therefore becomes not a threat, but a concentrated expression of the gospel's entire ethic. Not what you said you believed, but how you lived. Not which boundaries you defended, but which people you saw. As a conclusion, this stands clear. Mercy is not an addition to faith. It is the form faith takes. Where mercy is given space, the kingdom of God is already near, not as an idea, but as lived reality. Thank you for listening. If you found this reflection meaningful, feel free to like, share, and subscribe. Peace and blessings to you.